right, the political spectrum. This topic gets discussed frequently. It's brought up often. The terms left and right are discussed often. And I want to try and make sense of this. What do we mean when we say left and right? What is it meant to be authoritarian or libertarian? I want to discuss this scale in a little bit more detail. So, when we talk about the government, what are we really discussing? We're discussing the state power, and that has a maximum, which we could define as 100%, and it has a minimum, which we could define as 0%. Now, this is a reasonable system. It is logical. It makes perfect sense. Instead, what we are taught is something approximating this system, which you see before you. We have two axes, one labeled authoritarian and libertarian, the other labeled economic right, economic left. We're not given much in the way of descriptors for these, and they use vague terms, but we can intuitively understand that anarchy is a thing, right? We all understand that anarchy is a point at which we lose society, everything breaks down, there is no law. Anarchy means without authority. So that has to be placed somewhere on this scale. Could it be the center? Well, if that's the center, that means that each one of these would be the extreme. So let's talk about what these extremes might mean. So let's go to the top first. We have an authoritarian system of government. We all know what authoritarianism is. That means total government control. So 100% state power. And now we have a division. We have authoritarian left and authoritarian right. Now this is a strange thing. Two sides to the same coin, one might say. But even more, so if we look at the bottom, it's libertarian right, libertarian left. Now, we would all agree libertarianism is free, what we might describe as laissez-faire. So we have to put that somewhere. So that would be the economic right, laissez-faire capitalism, as they say. And the economic left would be total state government control of socialism. So we have, again, extremes. Extremes make sense, except now we have to think about this. So this is no government power over economy right here. So this is the authoritarian. So the extreme would be a government that has complete and total control over everything except has laissez-faire capitalism. This makes sense somehow. The other side of this down here, we would have a libertarian government at the extreme. So we would go down to the extreme here. And over here we agree, so this is total economic control mixed with complete freedom with everything else. So it's a libertarian government. You can do everything you want to, except they will have complete and total control over the economy. Now this makes absolutely no sense. What we need to do is remove both of these quadrants and just collapse them down to just one. Something that looks like this, where we have 0% on one side, no government at all, and 100% on the other. A lot of terms are thrown around to describe what ends up here on this column, this 100% area. So once we start getting to that complete and total government, what might we call it? We might call it communism, socialism, fascism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, despotism, monarchy. All of these things really describe the same thing, though, don't they? What they really describe is an oligarchy. An oligarchy is a rule by an elite group that is bureaucratic in its nature. The people have no accountability towards them. They just govern you. Sometimes terms like plutocracy, rule by the rich, are thrown around, but that's the same thing. That's merely an oligarchy masquerading as another name. What we could really say is oligarchy is the most common form of government that we see on the planet, in that small groups of elite people control everything. We think of despots like Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, but did they have true power, or did they have a round table group of advisors whom led them, controlled them, and dictated to them what they must do? One can argue that they had power, but were more figureheads in the end. So when we talk about total government, what we really mean to say is there is a maximum, and you're going to get to a certain point where it can increase no further. So that's where we run into the problems here, is where is this maximum? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Because each one of these presents a maximum, but that makes no logical sense. We need to have something like approximating this to where we decrease to nothing. That's to move to the right. So if you're on the right, you want to decrease the government to a certain point, at which point you might get to nothing, and that would be what you might call an anarchist. Or you could be on the left, where you want to increase the government until its maximum point, and then we might call you a communist or a socialist or a fascist or pretty much anything you want to, but it's really all the same thing. It's totalitarianism. So somewhere, and it's probably not the middle, it's probably not 50% government control, somewhere is that medium where the republic can exist, where the rule of law supersedes over everything else, where we have a society where no one is above the law and everyone gets prosecuted for the same crimes equally. So that's the concept of the republic. Whether or not we're executing it is an entirely different conversation to be had. But for this conversation, what I really want to focus on is this scale offers you no real guidance as to where you're at, because the government exists in a state. Do you want to increase it or decrease it? So are you on the left? You want more power? Are you on the right? You want less power? Or are you a centrist? Do you think the government is fine as it is? Do you think the status quo is acceptable? In which case, you would call yourself a moderate or a centrist, something along those lines. But we all have an opinion on this somewhere. Should the government get more power than it has or less power than it has? That's the real definition of what it means to be left and right. And this idea of removing the economic power of the government, what government in the world doesn't control its economy in some way? The economy itself, money itself, requires government to exist. So you cannot have, under this system, you can't have money in a 0% no government society, because no one would agree on what defines the value of the money. So in order to have money, you already have a state. So there can be no society, no state where there is no money. You have to have some mechanism to establish trade. So this entire idea of an economic access, they are the same. Government power and economic power are one and the same. There's not two accesses, there's axes. There's just one. There's just 0% on one side, 100% on the other. Feel free to disagree with me. If you have any argument to present, I would love to hear it, because so far I haven't had anyone that really has anything other than a circular argument, so I would be interested to hear it. Thanks, and have a great day.